Brave New World. Hello and welcome to Brave New World programme. My name's John Harrison. Cross-cultural communications has become a bit of a buzzword these days, with the term being used frequently in the mainstream press. Yet few people, including me, outside of academia, really understand what this term cross-cultural communication actually means. And what is the relevance of this subject in today's world? A world that seems to be becoming more fragmented every year. Here to tell us about the subject is Dr. Oksana Danchevskaya, an associate professor at the Institute of Foreign Languages in Moscow, and she's a specialist in cultural studies, cross-cultural communication, and American Indian studies. Welcome to the program, Oksana.
Hello, John.
Tell us, please, Oksana, what's this all about? What is cross-cultural communication?
Well, in short, cross-cultural communication studies the communication of people from different cultures. But many people often misinterpret it, thinking that it happens only when the representatives of different ethnic backgrounds or people from different countries interact. And in fact, it's much wider, because every subculture, organization, religious group, gender, age, or social group has their own culture. And it means that communication between them can also be classified as cross-cultural.
So, within my own community, so I'm living in South London, within my own community there may be Baptists there, and there may be Islamic people, and they all may be white. That would also be cross-cultural communication. You're not just talking about people clearly from different countries, you're talking about people who are maybe in the same country but experiencing different culture, whatever it is.
Yes, that's true, at least as I see it, and many other scholars. Of course, there are different views, but I believe that we should consider all cultures.
Okay. And so is this sort of like, you say it's a humanitarian subject? How do you study it? Or is it a science?
I should say it's both, because it's an applied social science, and like any science, it has its object and subject of study, methodology, history, and even schools. But it's also a humanitarian subject, because it's very multidisciplinary and incorporates many other sciences and disciplines like cultural studies, psychology, linguistics, cultural anthropology, ethnology, sociology, communication studies, and more, and so on. So in fact, cross-cultural communication is very diverse. It includes so many aspects.
Right. Okay, so it's one of those sort of generic terms and words which spans a whole realm of different subjects which human beings have studied and know about. But what does it really, in a few words, then sum up this part of the program? What does cross-cultural communication do?
You mean what it studies?
What does it enable one to do if one studies it?
Well, if one studies it, it enables people to understand themselves better, first of all, because when we study other cultures, we also understand our own culture better. Second, it helps them to adjust their own behavior to different situations, both professional and personal ones, to somehow maybe not completely avoid, but at least get prepared for culture shock when they travel or have to live as expats or study abroad and so on. And basically be better communicators.
Because we understand ourselves, and therefore that helps us understand other people.
We understand ourselves, we learn not to judge others just by ourselves.
Right.
And we start to not only understand, but also respect other people, their cultures, their views, religions, beliefs, norms, and so on.
Well, that must be very difficult in today's world, which to me seems to be full of stereotypes, and stereotypes which are rammed down our throats every single day, and thousands of them about ourselves, included ourselves,
Absolutely.
The way we should behave, and of course at the same time about other people, about other cultures, and even more if you include what you've just been talking about, cultures within our own culture, which is something I never thought about. So how do you get around all that? I mean, how does the training that happens when people learn about cross-cultural communication, how do they learn how not to do that, to be bombarded and influenced by all the stereotypes that are coming into their consciousness every day?
Oh, there are so many different ways how to teach this, and I really love what I'm doing, and I try to apply different approaches. For example, in Moscow State Pedagogical University, where I work, we have this very interesting and very good program, theory and practice of cross-cultural cultural communication, where we prepare diverse specialists in this area. And I like to give different creative tasks to my students and a lot of practical work, because if we even look at the textbooks which exist nowadays, we have a lot of textbooks on theory of cross-cultural communication, but very, very few connected with the practical part. And it often happens that even after completing some course in some university, students don't even know what to do with that. Why do they need that? That's why practice, and practice. So I love to send my students, as I call it, to the field, to communicate directly with people, to meet those people, to interact in all possible ways, and so on.
Could you give me an example, please? How do you train people to do that? Because I know for myself, as somebody who I guess is in the communication world, how difficult it is, to listen, to train myself to listen, to actually understand what people are trying to tell me before I jump in with my own preconceived conclusion. I'm even asking you questions now. You know, I've got a list here of questions, which means that I've already figured out what you're going to tell me. I've already conceived the program, and you're just almost, incidental based on that kind of interviewing. But I guess the way to do it is more of an open-ended interview, isn't it? Where I don't know what you're going to say, and I don't know what this conversation is going to lead to. How do you train people to do that?
Well, in fact, what you're describing is exactly what interview is. As I said, as cross-cultural communication uses methods of research from different sciences, we also use a lot of sociological methods of research, like interviews, questionnaires, observation, and so on. So, for example, I ask students to, let's say the safest probably way is just to observe people. And you cannot even imagine what interesting results they get when, I am myself surprised sometimes when they tell me what they discover. They were observing, one of the many tasks they were doing was observing foreigners in the Moscow metro and the way how they behave regarding their personal space, regarding eye contact, non-verbal communication. And they made a lot of interesting observations.
Okay, I'm sorry, you've got to tell us about this. But after a short break.
Brave New World.
Welcome back to Brave New World. Today I'm talking to Dr. Oksana Danchevskaya, a specialist in cultural studies, cross-cultural communication and American Indian studies. And she works at the Institute of Foreign Language of Moscow State Pedagogical University. Now, Oksana, we really just got onto a very interesting subject. How do foreigners behave themselves from judging from the results of what your students have observed by seeing these people, for example, in Moscow metro?
Depending on the ethnicity, and as you can understand, when they observe people, they cannot not know 100% their ethnicity. They can only guess it. They notice that, let's call it, let's also stereotype a bit and generalize.
Yeah.
Asian people are usually a bit more polite, and they offer their seats to elderly people, and they try not to bump into anyone. Then African people are a bit more noisy, and they sometimes even listen to loud music, so don't really pay so much attention to the people around. Russians, unfortunately, were not the politest ones here, as we could guess. But
what are the English like? I suppose you can't tell whether English or not.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult about the English. Yeah.
But may I challenge you here? But that would be then to impose a framework, a matrix of behavior, which you have conceived beforehand, which was based on some previous research, or how people should behave. What is politeness?
Well, that's true. So what we usually do, we study simultaneously theory and practice, just not to have my students have those stereotypes before they go on for some field research. Of course, we need to learn some theoretical stuff, but then we just continue with the practical one, and then we see if what they studied was right, because sometimes they see that this is quite the opposite.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to make an excuse here. I'm going to to refer to my notes. I'm going to return back to quantitative questioning because I'm working within the framework of a 15-minute radio program. So excuse me, all you qualitative interview people out there. My next question. I hear that you're a specialist in North American Indians. What aspects of the history of this subject are you interested in particularly?
Personally, I'm mostly interested in mythology, and I started by American Indian mythology, and then I discovered how similar this is with the one of some other peoples, especially those from Siberia and the Russian North. And then there are so many mythological parallels and parallel motives all over the world that I got interested in all mythologies. But
well, I suppose you would do. I mean, if you've got Russian North is linked up to North American Indians, I mean that's pretty confusing, isn't it? If you grow up in the same world that I've grown up in, where there's definitely different countries, or different blocks of countries, and not to mention all the political and economic barriers as well between them at the moment, at least.
It could be just like in any other subject. The more we know, the more we understand we don't know.
The more we understand, the less we know. Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so that, I guess, leads us on to the most important question, which I've left until the end of the program. Now, then what is the purpose, and how can cross-cultural communications help us? I mean, let's face it, the world we live in is going through, I would say, an, quote, interesting phase. It seems to me that having been brought up in a liberal, I guess, democratic environment in Britain and being born into the EU, a structure which is now being threatened, and we seem to be moving towards fragmentation, not unification, it seems to me. I'm not becoming too political or anything like that, but it seems to me that we're living in a very interesting phase in world development. How can cross-cultural communication, what input can that make into perhaps understanding and even resolving some of the issues that we're up against today?
First, let me agree with you that, yes, we face some very interesting times, and I always tell my students that just look around, because you are living at the time of changes, and tomorrow the world will be already different. But about fragmentation, I believe it also depends on people a lot. How they themselves decide to what kind of world they want to live in fact. And we all understand that today cross-cultural communication is just inevitable and happens everywhere, all the time, on the personal level, and of course, also in international collaboration in politics, economics, business, education, cultural, social spheres, and many others. So obviously we all want this communication to be successful. But if we don't know at least some aspects of and characteristics of the cultural background of the people we deal with, we can easily make mistakes, and some of them can lead just to light misunderstandings or culture shock, which we can gradually overcome, but some can lead to serious consequences such as offense or relationship breaks and even conflicts. So surely we don't want this. And cross-cultural communication teaches us not only how to correct such unpleasant mistakes, but also to predict possible problem situations and avoid them. And it can also help us understand people's needs, reasons for their behavior, choose our own strategy, and as I said before, it can also help us understand our own culture better. I think it's also very important.
Yeah, and I remember learning, I think at school a long time ago, that stereotypes are created basically because of lack of knowledge, and one's brain fills in a vacuum when we don't know something about, correct me if I'm wrong, please, I'm not an expert, when we don't know something about something or somebody else, we fill that vacuum in with bits of information that other people perhaps have told us, or we've read, or we've just invented. Is that what stereotypes are?
Basically, yes.
So what you're doing then, CCC, let's call it, is a kind of antidote to stereotypes then? Yes,
I guess so. And as I also mentioned, many people who start studying it first know very little about it. And they are full of those ethnic stereotypes. And not just ethnic, just all kinds of stereotypes. And gradually learning, they start to realize this is not quite so. and let's just study a bit more. And the more they start to get out of their comfort zone and communicate and learn new people, their traditions, their way of life, world outlook, the more they get interested and motivated. And the more we open up, the better we become.
Is the world ready for this subject?
It's absolutely ready, and it's not just ready, we really need it in today's world.
Okay, final question. Why?
Why? Because maybe it sounds a bit too pathetic, but it's in our hands to change this world for the better. I believe so.
Okay, and cross-cultural communication can help that happen.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, with those very, very interesting and profound words, we'll end this program. And thank you very much indeed, Dr. Oksana Danchevskaya, for coming in to see us here at Sputnik Radio Brave New World program. And just to remind you, listeners, Oksana is a specialist in cultural studies, cross-cultural communication, and American Indian studies. And she works at the Institute of Foreign Languages of Moscow State Pedagogical University. And I thank you very much indeed, listeners, for being with us today. Please do tune in again next week. Goodbye.